where do you sit on eggs and dietary cholesterol? This is another one that comes up quite a bit. We've spoken a lot here today about saturated fat and serum cholesterol. Is dietary cholesterol something that you speak about to your patients, or do you mostly focus on saturated fats?
So I usually focus on saturated fats, but and I'm talking to you, I'm a cardiologist. I have chickens at home. We have chickens and we get their eggs and we eat them. The egg studies have gone back and forth, but I think if you look at the totality of evidence, people at extremes of dietary cholesterol intake, like we usually recommend 200 milligrams a day, maybe up to 300, right? So that's like 1, 2, maybe 3 eggs a day. But the totality of evidence says about 1 egg a day, 2 eggs a day is not going to be a problem. But people at extremes of dietary cholesterol, like 400, 500, up to 1,000 milligrams a day, they do have increased LDL and increased cardiovascular mortality. So if you're within the normal ranges, you're probably fine. But if you're eating 10 eggs a day or something outrageous like that for a long time, we're not saying like on Sunday you ate 5 eggs, no big deal. But if you're doing that like 10 eggs a day every day for years, that's going to add up. And it'll show in your cholesterol profile. Your cholesterol will go up, your LDL will go up. So we know that's going to happen. Dietary cholesterol usually is also with saturated fat. It's kind of hard to separate the two. But we know at extremes of cholesterol intake, there is an effect. So yeah, in the normal ranges, let's say 300 or below, you're probably going to be fine. But if you start getting above 400, 500, 600, definitely there is an effect. So, and I posted a couple of videos on eggs, one showing the side where yes, eggs are great for you, and one showing the sides of maybe you want to tone it down a little. So, the evidence is like a little bit back and forth. I think the general consensus is 1 egg a day, 2 eggs a day, probably not a problem. They are super nutritious. They're full of vitamins. They're full of minerals. It's like one little very nutritious package in like a little thing. So it's almost like taking a supplement. It's like one little packet you just eat every day. It's fine. But if you're eating 10, 15 eggs a day, that could definitely lead to some very elevated serum markers.
Do you think that one of the best ways of kind of determining let's say someone listening, I think some of the listeners here probably do not consume eggs. I don't, but there'll be plenty of listeners that do, and they'll be interested in how much they can consume. And you mentioned there's a lot of different evidence suggesting different things, but broadly speaking, you talk about 1 or 2 eggs a day. I often come back to this idea of as an individual. So we were talking there about public health kind of recommendations and results from studies looking at the average. On the individual level, do you agree that probably eating a certain dietary pattern, testing your lipids, seeing where they're at, going back to what you mentioned before, like the target LDL cholesterols, if you're above that and not in that, then modulating and making some changes. Maybe you do need to reduce your egg consumption or saturated fats, or maybe you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a very logical way of doing it. If you're eating, let's say 3 eggs a day, you check your cholesterol, your LDL is 180, probably want to reduce that and one variable at a time, reduce that and see, just like a scientific experiment. You wouldn't reduce that plus butter plus whatever. Pick one thing and change it and see. Wait 3 months, check it again. I would completely agree with that. And if your LDL gets back down into the normal range, you know that you're more sensitive to that type of dietary pattern. Absolutely.